There was a line in a somewhat obscure Robin Williams film called The Best of Times, wherein a character tried to replay a famous football game in which his fumbling the ball at the last minute cost them the game. During the replay of that game, a character took him aside at the last minute and said, "Half these people came tonight to watch you catch the ball. The other half came to see you drop it." I think the same can be said of my audience whenever I review one of these. I think most tune in to see if I will be just as boneheaded as they perceive me to be in my past opinions on the films, and some tune in to watch me continue to rail against them like a Lutheran hanging a sign on a church's door. Which side will be pleased this time? Let's find out. But first, the preamble. Once again, I find myself reviewing a sequel without reviewing the first installment first. I know this can cause a bit of disappointment among my viewers, but let me reiterate how these reviews work. I review films, not commercials. And cobbling together a ridiculous and stupid plot with terrible supporting characters and atrocious dialogue just to set up the Avengers and squeeze out one more guy for the Avengers to have in it when they could have just introduced him there and saved us all a lot of time and money is not something that I'm going to bother to comment on. These are not films. But since my more positive receptions of the Marvel installments, people have been telling me the same thing. Wow, Matthew, you seem to like the Phase 2 films a lot more than the Phase 1 films. Phase 2? Really? That's what we're doing now? We've got Iron Man 3, Thor 2, and Captain America 2 in Phase 2? We can't just make movies, we have to reduce these things to phases? What happens if this thing goes on for decades before it becomes unprofitable? Are we really going to have Phase 12 that has Iron Man 6, Thor 5, and Captain America 15? Fine. If we're going by phases, then my reading of the whole thing is this. Phase 1 consisted of all these superheroes walking into the room going, "We're here! Ta-da!" and having a bunch of confetti explode behind them. Phase 2 then consists of them actually doing something that might be worth my time and money. We first had Iron Man 3, the first legitimate attempt of the studio to actually make a film since the first Iron Man, and which came out very well. It was a slightly undercooked in parts, but nevertheless respectable and good hearty meal at a 4-star restaurant. Then came Thor: The Dark World, the big frothy milkshake for dessert at the end. Not the fanciest dessert you could possibly have, but delicious and satisfying nonetheless. And if I had to make a similar analogy for Captain America: The Winter Soldier, it would probably be one of those steaks that you eat as a contest, where you get it free if you can actually eat the whole thing in one sitting. It's delicious, but eventually you're like, dude, I just don't think I can eat that much. Can I have a to-go box, please? This has the thickest plot of any of these Marvel films I've seen so far, and I give it a hell of a lot of credit off the bat just for that. The Winter Soldier is trying to do a lot, and look at the words I just used in that sentence. Trying, do. These aren't words I ever thought I would use in this series, but there you have it. Another legitimate film from the makers of crap. Perhaps those days are behind us after all. The theme of this film is trust. More specifically, it tackles the question of whether or not we should trust our own government to keep us safe, or to know what's in our own best interest. The answer the film gives, as I read it, is no, but it's not a black and white no. There are people and organizations within our government that have our best interest in mind. You just can't ever count on that not to change, and things in this movie change very quickly. We start out with Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, on a somewhat routine mission to free a few hostages aboard a SHIELD vessel that has been taken over by pirates. He's accompanied by the redhead, and these two actually have a few back and forths that make me smile, as she encourages him to settle into the present and even tries to set him up with a woman. Everything turns out fine, and Captain America is soon after briefed by Nick Fury about Operation Insight. This operation involves helicarriers that are linked to spy satellites, and they're designed to preemptively eliminate threats. Nick Fury is obviously fine with this, but Captain America is furious, claiming that Nick is keeping America free by putting a big gun to its head. An interesting debate ensues until the two part ways, and Steve begins revisiting his past, and in doing so, he seems to be having trouble acclimating to the present. Nick, meanwhile, is ambushed in a deeply thrilling sequence as it turns out that S.H.I.E.L.D. has been compromised from within. Captain America is branded a fugitive, he and Redhead run away and attempt to piece together the conspiracy before it's too late, and the whole thing settles into a very nice and thick plot. Occasionally, he encounters the Winter Soldier, and since this character was apparently so important that they made him the title of the film, I figured his character would be a little better than this. What his actual identity is remains a mystery throughout much of the film, but even after it's revealed, he isn't much more than a fighting prop in the film. He has one metal arm that makes him formidable in hand-to-hand combat, but as that's pretty much all he does in the film, you soon realize that this character is pretty much just the arm. The plot eventually links some of the first movie into this one, and does it in a way that makes sense and works. Hydra, the Nazi baddies from the stupid-ass first movie, have been infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. for decades, acting as sleeper agents and sowing the seeds of global chaos in the hope that humanity will willingly surrender its freedom in exchange for their security. The infiltrators overtake virtually every level of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s infrastructure until eventually it feels like Captain America and Redhead don't have a friend in the world. So S.H.I.E.L.D. is essentially Hydra. They're essentially a combination of the two, and each side of that organization is going to have a fuck of a time trying to tell friend from foe. This was a hell of a bold move on the part of the writers, as S.H.I.E.L.D. was initially designed to be the good guy agency, but this calls all of that into question now. The crux of the film is that the weapons, technologies, and surveillance we have in place to keep our citizens safe may work just fine when we have a government and/or organizations that will use them responsibly, but with our governments and/or organizations constantly changing, we can never be sure that they won't fall into the wrong hands. Same technology, same principles, different ideas of what our safety entails. The root of the plot involves an algorithm running computer that uses all of the information it has gathered about ordinary citizens to determine if they will do anything nefarious in the future. Using that information, the Hydra agents can then target all of these individuals and wipe them off the face of the earth before they ever have a chance to do so. It's akin to the plot of Minority Report, except it's actually good. This idea has in fact been used several times in fiction, in everything from Asimov to BioShock 2, but it works quite well in this story because it ties into the theme of trust. The only reason this computer even exists is to keep people safe, and that's exactly what Hydra thinks it's doing by preemptively killing these people. Captain America, the Winter Soldier is a story of infiltration and covert governmental tactics, also known as not my kind of film. But that's another thing I love about this movie. They didn't just make another dumb action shoot-'em-up. Someone, somewhere in the writing of this thing actually said, what kind of film would we like to make? What genre of film would make sense for this franchise? Oh, I know, a political thriller. That makes perfect sense. We've got a patriotic super soldier, a covert organization. Everything we have plays right into that genre, and I think we have a story that fans of those movies will like. I'm not a fan of these kinds of films, but look at this. They took a chance and did something different. When referencing their inspirations for this film, the two head writers were throwing out titles like 3 Days of the Concorde, The Parallax View, and Marathon Man. Marathon Man! Holy hell, actual films inspiring a Marvel movie? Have I crossed into a parallel dimension where the creative forces behind these films actually care about filmmaking? Actually, in light of many statements that have recently come out, from Joss Whedon expressing his opinion that The Avengers could have been a much better film than he ultimately made it, and the statements of these two wanting to elevate these films into something other than fan service, I think I might have been wrong about that all along. I think if these creative talents had had more freedom and control over these films in the beginning, the earlier installments would have been a lot better than they were. And that seems to have been fucked up by the retarded studio being under the impression that they're selling toys rather than films. But that's the studio. The people behind these movies seem to have a genuine interest in making these movies better. And I have to say, after turning out genuinely good films like Iron Man 3 and The Winter Soldier, they are starting to make a believer out of me. But it's not to say that The Winter Soldier is without criticism. It seems to me like the creative forces behind this film were well aware that Steve Rogers isn't the most interesting character on their roster, and I was hoping that the S.H.I.E.L.D. characters would be used to support him and prop up his more uninteresting bits. But it was actually kind of the other way around. In the first half of the film, Rogers seemed to be more in support of them than anything else. For a while there, you could have called this S.H.I.E.L.D. The Winter Soldier, and it would have been just as apt a title. Also, I get that the emphasis of films of this kind is the plot, but it's a bit of a shame that virtually no character development happens for anyone in this film. Their function in the plot is fine, but I wouldn't say that this movie is about them. Rogers doesn't learn much about himself or have any personal challenges to overcome save for the end, which I thought was just a bit underdone. There was a great scene with him in the beginning that could have fixed that, though. Steve comes to what is essentially the deathbed of one of his old girlfriends who is now an old woman, and her memory starts to fade. It was one of the only emotional moments in the film, and I thought they could have done a lot more with this. The character Black Widow does do a little bit of contemplating of her own lies and how it feels to be lied to herself by the people she cares about, but not much development there either. And the eye patch guy pretty much remains the same boring prop that he's always been in these. They also introduce a new character, but he's so underused I can't even remember his name. I liked his character a lot, but it seems like he was always trying to find his place in the film and never quite could. But for what it's worth, The Winter Soldier is a surprisingly ambitious film. Character development might not have been high on the list of priorities, but it has a genuinely insightful plot that I'm still thinking about days after I saw this. I remember saying that Thor: The Dark World was good for what it was, but not in the same league as Iron Man 3. This is in the same league as Iron Man 3. Not as good, in my opinion, but I think the argument can at least be made with this. My view and theories on this franchise so far is that these films would simply take the path of least resistance, forego story and characters, and simply ride out the action train until they stop making money off of people. I was wrong. Maybe the production of these films was like the plot of this film itself, where you have people who do care and people who don't in the same organization. And it seems like the people who do care are winning the battle for now, so I sincerely look forward to seeing what they have next. But for now, Captain America: The Winter Soldier receives a high recommendation.